After my heart transplant, I started missing a man I had never met, and he was missing me too. The first thing I noticed after the surgery wasn't pain, it was familiarity. I woke up with a heart that didn't feel new at all. It felt experienced, like it had lived a life before choosing to keep me alive. Doctors called it a miracle. My family cried with relief. Everyone celebrated the fact that I was still here. No one warned me that survival would come with memories. At first, they were small. A sudden comfort with driving roads I'd never taken. A strange longing for a beach I'd never visited. The smell of black coffee making me emotional, even though I'd never liked it before. I told myself it was trauma, medication, my brain trying to make sense of what my body had been through. Then I started dreaming. In my dreams, I was standing in a small apartment with chipped blue paint on the walls. I could describe every corner. The cracked mirror in the hallway, the guitar leaning against the couch, the man sitting on the floor, laughing softly as he tuned it. I didn't know his name, but I knew I loved him. I woke up crying with my hand pressed against my chest, my heart beating too fast, too familiar. It felt like grief, not mine. Borrowed? Weeks passed and the dreams didn't fade. They grew clearer. I remembered moments that carried emotion instead of logic. Holding someone's hand during bad news, arguing over nothing, making up without words. I tried to explain it to my therapist. She smiled gently and said, identity shifts were normal after major surgery. She told me to ground myself in the present, but the present felt incomplete. One afternoon, while sorting through my post-surgery paperwork, I noticed the donor information. Minimal, age, blood type, gender, male. I stared at the word male longer than I should have. That night, the dream changed. I wasn't watching anymore. I was being watched. He was standing across the street from me, confusion written all over his face, his hand pressed against his chest exactly where mine hurt. When our eyes met, recognition hit us both like impact. You feel it too, he said. I woke up gasping. That was the moment I knew something was wrong, or maybe something was right in a way no one could explain. I didn't just receive a heart. I received unfinished love. And somewhere out there, a man was living with the echo of my existence inside his chest, just like I was living with his. Do you believe organs can carry memories? Would you search for someone you only knew through dreams? After that dream, I stopped pretending I was imagining things. My heart didn't just beat differently, it remembered differently. I woke up each morning with the quiet certainty that someone else was waking up with the same confusion I felt. I began keeping a notebook, not for recovery notes or medication schedules, but for memories that didn't belong to my life, addresses that surfaced without context, songs I could hum perfectly without knowing the lyrics, a name that hovered just out of reach, close enough to ache. The dreams became conversations. He never introduced himself. Neither did I. We spoke as if names were unnecessary. He told me things without words, that he felt empty in rooms that used to feel full, that certain streets made his chest tighten, that sometimes he reached for his phone, desperate to call someone he couldn't remember. I felt it too. One morning, while walking past a cafe near my apartment, my body froze. I knew this place. Not logically, but emotionally. The chipped wooden table by the window, the smell of burnt toast, the sound of laughter that had once lived here. I had never been inside before. My hand shook as I stepped in. The barista smiled like she recognized me. Same as usual, she asked casually. I said yes without knowing why. The coffee tasted like grief and comfort mixed together. That was when I realized these weren't random fragments, they were locations, real ones, which meant the man from my dreams existed somewhere nearby, living a life that brushed against mine without touching. I started tracing the memories backward, following emotional pull instead of logic. A park bench that made my heart slow down, a bookstore where my chest felt warm and familiar, an apartment building that made my breathing unsteady. I didn't go inside. I wasn't ready. That night, the dream came earlier than usual. He was closer this time, sitting across from me at a table I now recognized. You found it, he said quietly. I didn't mean to, I replied. He smiled sadly. Neither did I. I asked him what he remembered. He touched his chest and said it felt like losing someone without ever meeting them, like grief with no permission. I told him it felt like loving someone without a beginning. When I woke up, there was a message request on my phone from an unknown number. Do you ever feel like your heart is looking for someone it has already lost? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Yes. The typing dots appeared immediately. I think we should talk. My heart began to race, not in panic, but recognition. Because whatever had been exchanged in surgery didn't just connect two bodies. It connected two unfinished lives that were finally moving toward each other. And I knew that once we met, nothing would feel separate again. If your heart remembered someone, would you follow it? We agreed to meet without saying the word meet. It felt too intentional, too heavy for something that had already been happening without permission. Instead, we chose a place our hearts recognized before our minds did. The park came first. I arrived early and sat on the bench that always slowed my breathing, the one that felt like relief. I didn't check my phone. I didn't rehearse anything. My chest already knew how this moment would feel. When he appeared, I recognized him instantly, not from dreams, from memory that didn't belong to my eyes. He walked like someone unsure of gravity, one hand resting unconsciously over his chest. When his gaze lifted and found me, everything inside me went still. He stopped a few feet away. It's you, he said quietly. I nodded. Words felt unnecessary. He sat beside me without asking. The space between us felt familiar, like something we had already crossed a long time ago. I thought I was losing my mind, he said. I kept missing someone I couldn't name. So did I replied. I thought survival was supposed to feel grateful. He smiled faintly. Instead, it feels unfinished. We talked slowly, carefully, as if sudden movements might break whatever was holding us together. He told me his name was Theo. I told him mine. Hearing our names spoken aloud felt strange, like assigning labels too late. He described memories I'd written in my notebook, the blue apartment walls, the guitar, the coffee shop. I finished his sentences without realizing it. Sometimes we laughed, sometimes we went quiet together. There's something else, he said eventually. I remember dying. The word landed gently but firmly. I inhaled. I remember losing you. We sat with that truth between us. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. He told me he had received a heart transplant 6 months ago. Mine had been 2 months after his. Two strangers connected through loss, now bound by survival. They said my donor was female, he said. They didn't tell me more. My pulse thudded. They said mine was male. We looked at each other then, truly looked. Not as mysteries, not as miracles. As people who had been altered in ways no chart could explain. Do you feel like parts of you don't belong? He asked. Yes, I answered. But with you, it feels like they finally do. He reached for my hand without hesitation. The moment our skin touched, my heart settled. Not racing, not aching, settling. I don't know what this means, he said. Neither do I replied. But I know what it feels like. He nodded, like remembering something we're allowed to keep. As the sun dipped lower, neither of us moved. We weren't rushing to define anything. We were learning how to sit inside it. That night, for the first time since surgery, I didn't dream, because whatever had been searching for me had finally found its way home. If fate gave you a second chance, would you question it? After that meeting, everything shifted. I walked through the city and nothing felt foreign. Every street, every cafe, every corner that had once stirred vague longing now felt like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. I wasn't just recalling memories anymore. I was living them alongside someone who remembered them too. Theo called the next morning. His voice was calm but tentative, like he was testing the boundaries of something fragile. I keep seeing places I don't recognize, he said, but they feel like home. Me too, I replied. It's like my heart is leading me somewhere my mind hasn't arrived yet. We started seeing each other regularly, quietly, not dates, not labels, just presence. Coffee that tasted familiar, walks that brought back conversations I never had. Our hands brushed naturally, our laughter fell into rhythms that felt pre-written. It was intimacy without urgency, understanding without explanation. And then the memories started to deepen. I remembered his birthday. Not the date, not the gifts, just the way the light fell on him as he stood by a window. I remembered his favorite songs, the lyrics he hummed without knowing why. I remembered arguments and apologies, small gestures of love I had never given but somehow owed to him. They weren't mine, but they were a part of me now. One night, as we walked past the park where we first met, he stopped. I saw it again, he said, his hand over his chest, the moment before the accident. I froze. You remember it? I do. It's like I was living in pieces before, fragments scattered, and now they're together. And you're here. I reached for his hand and squeezed. I felt it too. That unfinished part of us, it's ours now. From that moment, we shared everything cautiously. Dreams, memories, fears. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if it was love or if it was just the echo of what had been. But then he would laugh at a private joke only our hearts knew, and I would forget everything else. Not everyone understood. Friends asked if it was obsession. Family worried we were projecting. I didn't care. Because logic had nothing to do with a heart that remembered a stranger as intimately as it remembered itself. Theo and I began mapping our shared memories. A street corner here, a coffee shop there, a park bench that seemed to appear in every fragment. The past and present converged until I couldn't tell where I ended and he began. And I didn't want to. Sometimes at night, I pressed my palm over my chest and felt him there. Not as a ghost, not as memory, but as someone alive. Someone breathing the same air I did. Someone who had unknowingly carried me inside him while I had carried him. I realized then that surviving the heart transplant wasn't just about staying alive. It was about finding the person my heart had been waiting for without knowing it. And Theo was that person. Would you follow a heart that remembered someone else? Then the memories started to do more than whisper. They began to pull me into moments I hadn't lived yet, moments that felt like warnings and promises tangled together. I woke up one morning knowing things about Theo I had no right to know. The way he laughed when nervous, the scars on his hands, the books he hadn't shown me yet. It was like my heart had become a library, cataloging his life without permission. I tried to ignore it. I told myself survival should feel ordinary, but each heartbeat reminded me that ordinary was no longer possible. And then it happened. The memory that made my chest shiver with recognition and fear. His voice, not in dreams. In real life, clear as morning sunlight, saying my name. It wasn't a dream. I'd never heard it before, but it felt familiar in the way old songs do. Like my soul had been humming along without knowing the tune. I grabbed my phone, half expecting a call or a message that hadn't arrived yet. There was nothing. Just me and the pounding of a borrowed heart that insisted on truth. When Theo came the next day, I couldn't look at him. I was afraid he would see it in my eyes. The knowledge that belonged to him and me, and yet neither of us fully understood. But he did. Somehow he always did. Without words, he sat across from me and pressed his hand to his chest. The same gesture I had begun to mimic instinctively. Our hearts aligned before our minds caught up. I dreamed of it last night, he said softly, and I recognized the words as mine before they left his lips. Not the dream itself, but the feeling, the pull. It's like we were supposed to find each other. I swallowed hard. I feel it too, I admitted, like I'm remembering a life I never lived. He nodded slowly, and for a long moment, silence claimed the space between us. It wasn't empty. It was charged, electric with the knowledge that our hearts had crossed paths before we ever touched, before we ever knew names or faces. Then the most frightening memory arrived. Not mine, not his. Ours. A car accident, the hospital, the donors, all fragments of survival stitched into fear and hope. My stomach dropped as I realized what it meant. Our lives had been saved at the cost of one another's hearts. He carried mine, I carried his, and now the memories were catching up. They demanded recognition. I looked at him, my chest trembling. Do you know what this means? I think, he said slowly, we were supposed to carry pieces of each other until we found the whole. And suddenly I understood. Survival wasn't just living, it was knowing. It was finding the person whose heart had kept me alive, whose memories had become mine, whose existence I couldn't forget even if I tried. We didn't speak for a while, we didn't need to. Our hands found each other and the silence said everything. What would you do if your heart remembered someone else? After that day, everything felt fragile and urgent at once. The memories weren't just visiting anymore, they were insisting. They pulled me into fragments of Theo's life I hadn't seen firsthand. A meeting he'd been late to, A fight he'd had with a friend, a letter he'd written and never sent. Each one left a knot in my chest, half fear, half longing, because I could feel him in places he wasn't. I started leaving small notes for myself, little reminders that some of these memories weren't mine to claim, that I had to tread carefully. But the heart doesn't care about caution. It doesn't ask permission. It only beats. It only remembers. One evening, Theo came over, his eyes holding the same unsettled intensity I felt in the mirror. "Something's wrong," he said immediately, pressing a hand to his chest. I recognized the tension even before he spoke. Our hearts were synchronized in warning. "What is it?" I asked softly. "I'm remembering more than I should," he admitted. "Scenes, things I never lived. I can feel someone else's fear, someone else's pain." I nodded, gripping my own chest. "I feel it too. And it's not just memories anymore, it's like they're trying to tell us something." We sat in silence, letting the pulse of our hearts speak. Then came the vision that made me freeze. A hospital room, a man on a stretcher, monitors beeping, and me, standing at the edge, hand trembling as I reached for a heart I didn't understand yet. Theo gasped when I whispered, "That's you." "I saw it too," he said, voice tight. "That's the accident. That's the night I almost didn't make it." The truth hit me like ice. Our lives had intersected in the worst possible way. Without each other's hearts, we wouldn't exist now. But more than survival, the memories carried emotion. Love, grief, unfinished longing that hadn't belonged to either of us before. We realized then that the heart we carried wasn't just a gift, it was a message. Whoever had been responsible for the transplants, whoever had chosen us, had unknowingly tethered us together. And now, the memories were guiding us toward understanding, toward the person whose life had intertwined with ours in ways our minds couldn't explain. "I don't know if this is fate or science," I whispered, voice shaking, "but it feels like we're meant to find each other. Not just live, but really find each other." Theo reached for my hand. "Then we do. No more waiting. No more pretending these memories aren't ours. Whatever comes, we face it together." For the first time since the surgery, I felt steady. My heart had carried someone else's life, and now it had brought him to me. The memories weren't confusing anymore. They were the bridge. And crossing it meant accepting not only survival, but the extraordinary truth of what it meant to share a heart. Would you face someone whose memories were inside your own? After that day, everything felt more urgent. The memories weren't just echoes anymore. They carried warnings, hints, and fragments of a life that had ended too soon. Theo and I began piecing them together like a puzzle we didn't know existed, tracing the donor's life, the moments that had been too brief, too incomplete, and too raw to leave behind. One afternoon, we found ourselves in the donor's old apartment. The key had been left in the file, part of the post-surgery paperwork. We hesitated at the door, both afraid and compelled. Everything inside smelled faintly like him, like faint traces of coffee, leather, and the pages of books he had loved. I pressed my palm to the wall and felt an electric familiarity, a heartbeat embedded in the air. Theo walked ahead, tracing the furniture, the cracked blue walls, the guitar leaning against the corner. I watched him, feeling fragments of memories settle in my chest like pieces finally finding their home. "It's like I've been here before," he whispered. "And you too. You belong here." We sat on the couch, silence stretching as our hearts spoke. The donor's life was tangible in the quiet. The apartment held laughter, arguments, regrets, and love that neither of us had earned but had inherited. For the first time, I understood that the heart transplant didn't just give life, it gave connection, a tether to someone we were supposed to meet even in absence. "Do you think he knew?" I asked softly. "That he would leave part of himself behind?" Theo nodded slowly. "I think he did, and he trusted us to carry it, to finish what he couldn't." Then came the memory that made us both flinch, a fight. Theo's voice in the memory, angry, frustrated, a side of him I had never known. And mine, screaming in confusion, feeling emotions that weren't supposed to be mine. I clutched my chest. "It's like we're living his unfinished life." "We are," Theo said, "but it's not ours to finish alone. We do it together." I realized then that the bond we felt, the pull, the familiarity, the unexplainable love was deeper than memory. It was responsibility. It was carrying someone's essence with care, honoring it by allowing it to shape us without overwhelming us. We stayed until evening, tracing more memories, letting the donor's life speak through us. And as the sun dipped low, casting orange light across the apartment, I felt a certainty I hadn't allowed myself before. Theo wasn't just someone who remembered my heart. He was someone who shared it. Literally, physically, emotionally. Our lives had been rewritten by this convergence. When we left, our hands brushed, then interlocked. No words were necessary. Our hearts had already spoken. And I knew with every pulse that whatever lay ahead, whether confusion, danger, or discovery, we would face it side by side, carrying pieces of someone we never met but who had given us the rarest gift, each other. After that day in the apartment, the memories didn't stop. They began intruding into reality in ways that were impossible to ignore. I would wake up knowing things I shouldn't, places I'd never been, conversations I hadn't had, faces I had never seen, and always, always Theo. One evening while I was walking home, I felt a sudden jolt of fear, not mine, but his. My chest tightened in a way that made my breath shallow. I pulled out my phone and saw a missed call from Theo. I called him immediately. "Something's wrong," he said, voice trembling. "I'm remembering something dangerous. Someone was following me back then, the night before the accident. I didn't know why." I shivered. The memories flooded in simultaneously like a wave breaking inside me. A dark car parked outside the hospital. A man with a shadowed face. Words shouted that I didn't understand, but felt deep in my chest. Fear, urgency, warning. "We need to find out what happened," I said, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. "Before it reaches us now." He hesitated, then agreed. We decided to retrace the donor's last days, to uncover the fragments of danger that had been left behind. Each memory brought us closer to the truth, but also closer to risk. It was no longer just about love, or memory, or connection. It was about survival, about understanding why our hearts had been given to each other in the first place. The next day, we went to the hospital where the donor had been treated. The nurses remembered him, their faces soft with pity. He was a kind soul, one said, but he was frightened toward the end. Someone was pressuring him, threatening him. We never understood why. Theo and I exchanged a glance. The memories aligned. The fear, the presence of someone watching, the fragmented warnings. We weren't imagining it. It had happened, and now we were the inheritors of it. Back at the apartment, the memories hit harder. The donor's journal appeared in fragments in our minds. Names, addresses, even the sketch of a man who had been following him. And it became terrifyingly clear those fragments weren't just memories. They were clues, a path we had to follow to protect ourselves and understand the life that had been embedded inside us. I pressed my palm to my chest and felt Theo's hand cover mine through memory and presence. Whatever comes next, he said, we face it together. This heart brought us here. That means it trusts us to finish what it couldn't. I nodded, realizing the truth. Our connection wasn't only love, it was destiny. It was survival. It was carrying someone's life forward without losing ourselves in the process. And I knew one thing for certain. The heart doesn't just beat. It remembers. It warns. It chooses. And ours had chosen each other to face the danger we couldn't ignore. Would you follow memories that felt dangerous? The closer we got to the truth, the heavier the memories became. It was no longer whispers or fragments. It was a storm inside my chest, pulling me toward a reality I hadn't expected. Theo and I were connected in ways beyond love. Our hearts were carrying the unfinished life of someone who had trusted us with everything. One night, the memories led me to a small, abandoned building near the edge of town. I recognized it instantly. The donor had come here the night before the accident. Fear had followed him. He had left pieces behind, invisible to anyone else but screaming through our hearts. I felt Theo's presence even before I saw him, his hand brushing mine instinctively. This is it, he whispered, voice tight. Everything the memories led us to. Inside, the place smelled of dust and old paper. Shadows clung to the corners, and I felt the donor's panic echoing through my veins. Theo took my hand, grounding me. We have to be careful. Whoever threatened him might still be around. We searched the apartment like rooms, piecing together the donor's last hours. Files, letters, even a discarded phone that had been wiped clean. But the memories guided us, hearing voices, seeing fleeting faces, the echo of footsteps that weren't ours. And then, behind a false panel, we found it, a small notebook. His handwriting detailed threats, people he feared, and most importantly, the man who had been following him, the one who caused the accident that took his life and gave us these hearts. I held the notebook against my chest, feeling my pulse sink with his words. It wasn't just history, it was a warning, and it was ours to act upon. Theo looked at me, his eyes soft but resolute. We survived this because of him, and we need to survive what comes next, not for us but for him, and for ourselves. I nodded. Suddenly, every fragment, every memory, every pulse of stolen emotion made sense. Love and survival had brought us together, but courage would keep us alive. We left the building and stepped into the night, hearts beating in tandem, memories fading into the present as if making room for us to write our own story. Theo squeezed my hand. I don't know how we're supposed to do this, he admitted. Step by step, I whispered. Like the memories guided us here. We'll face it together. For the first time since the transplant, I felt a clarity that wasn't frightening. The heart I carried had given me life, love, and purpose. Theo's heart had done the same. And now together, we weren't just surviving the aftermath. We were living the continuation of a life that had never truly ended, honoring it by embracing what it had left behind, each other. The danger had not disappeared, but our hearts had found certainty. And for the first time, I understood the true meaning of carrying someone's soul inside you. It wasn't fear or grief or unfinished love. It was connection. It was choice. It was the courage to follow a heart no matter how borrowed into the life you were meant to live. If your life was tied to someone else's memories, would you follow them? The danger never fully disappeared, but somehow it didn't matter as much anymore. Theo and I had each other, and that connection made every memory, every pulse, every fragment of someone else's life feel alive instead of terrifying. We spent the next days retracing everything one last time, making sense of the donor's life, the threats he had faced, the choices he hadn't been able to make, and slowly, with every discovery, the fear dissolved into understanding. We weren't carrying only loss, we were carrying the gift of his trust, the privilege of his heart. One evening, after a long day of searching through the donor's old notes and retracing streets, we sat together on the bench where we first met. The city around us hummed quietly, unaware of the lives that had been rewritten by a single act of survival. Theo turned to me, eyes soft and steady. Do you ever feel like all of this, every memory, every pulse, every fragment, was meant to bring us here? I nodded, pressing my hand to his chest. Every heartbeat brought me to you, not by accident, not by chance, but because someone wanted it that way. And now, it's ours. We leaned into each other, letting the weight of everything, the donor's life, our survival, our love, settle around us. It was peaceful. It was whole. It was the quiet triumph of hearts that had learned to remember, to trust, and to choose. The memories still visited occasionally, but now they were gentle, guiding, comforting. I could feel the donor's presence, but not as grief or loss, only as connection, as approval, as the invisible hand that had led us together. I never believed a heart could remember, I whispered. But it does, and it brought me to you. Theo's hand found mine, thumbs brushing lightly over the scar that marked my survival. And it brought me to you, he said. Not just your heart, but your life, your everything. We sat there in silence, letting the city glow around us, letting our hearts speak the words neither of us could have said before. Love that had begun as memory, fear, and borrowed emotion had finally become ours. And in that quiet moment, I understood what it meant to survive. Not just life, but love. Not just a heart transplant, but the extraordinary connection that followed. Not just the chance to live, but the courage to live fully, with someone whose soul had been intertwined with mine before we even knew it. We stood together, stepping into the night, the city lights reflecting off our joined hands. I pressed my palm to my chest one last time, feeling my heart and Theo's beat in perfect harmony. Our hearts had switched, but in doing so, they had found home.